Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jennifer DeGrucio. I'm the Community Education and Outreach Manager for Florida, and it's wonderful to connect with all of you. We had the privilege of speaking earlier to Susan and before, and it's great to be able to come back and to have these hospital safety guides. As you see, they have kind of changed a little bit. So I'm proud to introduce David Olds, who's an amazing ambassador here in Florida in Summerfield, I believe, right?
Yes,
And great, I always get confused, but he will be guiding us through this. And please feel free to ask any questions. As you know, he knows firsthand and myself as well. So um, look forward to it. Thank you all for having us here. And David, it's all yours.
great. Thank you so much. Look forward to doing this. I'm a fairly new ambassador. Fortunately, in preparing for this today, I actually did this presentation yesterday, so all this is kind of fresh to me. If I do look a little bug-eyed, I'm sorry. I had an eye doctor's appointment earlier this morning, so I'm still a bit dilated, but I'm pretty much able to read everything and to go ahead. Um, Certainly want to thank you all. I'll be going through the guide. I know you have it, and I'll be going through various pages and sections of it as we go along to help you better understand it or and explain how some of these tools and so on that we have could be used for you. Um, do want to make sure that we let you know that this is purely educational. This is not medical advice. I'm not a medical professional. Um, but we're just here to kind of guide you and help you should you ever be in a situation where you're having to have to go into a hospital. Um, if you see me get antsy, by the way, I used to give presentations before I was retired, and I never gave one sitting down. So this, and looking at a screen, I'm tended to be a walker. So if you see me moving, I'm sorry about that. I'm gonna go to some of the reasons. There we go. Um, why there's some of this is so important. Um, this year, this year alone, people with Parkinson's are at a much greater risk of being hospitalized. Overall, we've got over 1 million people who are currently in that, um, have this disorder. So the key is because of this increased probability of having to go to the hospital. We're talking 4 out of every 12 people with Parkinson's in the United States have the likelihood of going into a hospital during the course of this year. So there's a much greater need to be prepared and to address some of the unique situations. Of the 4 people that go into the hospital, 3 will not get their medications on time.
They seem to give it to you okay when you were in, because every time I asked them.
Yeah. 2 of the 3 will have complications as a result. Now, those complications can range anywhere from being relatively minor, little delay, maybe in their progress. It could be fairly significant and even lead up to death. So these are fairly, the most common of that, by the way, and we'll be talking about this some more a little bit later, would be a dysphagia, swallowing, which leads to aspiration and so on. So that's one of the major risks, and we'll be talking about that as we go along as well. As many of you probably are aware, one of the things that we're trying to avoid or to help people avoid is this symptom spiral, this negativity of kind of like a domino effect that could potentially happen, where one little thing tends to increase and spiral into others. And it's going to vary based on the individual and the situation. But the worsening of PD symptoms, briefly, you could have problems with movement. The problems with movement leads to a fall. You're getting, who knows? You could have broken bones or whatever the case may be. That's just one brief example, but this spiral can happen fairly quickly. So we want to keep people as close as possible to where they are and where they're able to continue to progress while they're dealing with whatever the other medical issue may be. So this guide was what was created. It was created by the Parkinson's Foundation. Had family members, people with Parkinson's, had a number of folks who pulled this together. Just in talking about the overall guide, there are 64 pages, I believe. The first 23 pages are going to be some of the information that we're going to be covering today. It has information, a lot of detailed material that I'll be referencing to you. The last 40 pages, and again, I'll be referring to some of these pages for you as we go, are going to be blank forms. So you'll have actual blank there, and most of them are tear-out pages that you will be able to use. So some of them are information sheets to pass out to healthcare givers, and some of them are going to be your actual resources that you can use should you have to be going into the hospital. The key for the hospital stay is preparing ahead. Sometimes you know when you're going into the hospital, and you can kind of prepare, get things together, talk with your various medical providers.
The safety guide is the book.
But a lot of times you don't know, and it's an emergency. So the key is to have not just this guide, but some other resources in place and ready to go, mainly because people with Parkinson's have this increased risk. One of the first things that's extremely helpful is if you go to page 64, I'm sorry, it's the very back. Is to carry a Parkinson's identification in case of emergency. Now, there's a number of identifications. Again, this is the very back pages 63, 64. These are tear-out cards. You have these that you can use. There are other alternative forms to this. You don't need, I would encourage you have this with you. But other options would be to get a phone ID, mobile phone. You have these medical, like on Apple, they have a medical ID. I'll admit I haven't set mine up yet in my phone, but that is something I'm going to be doing because as I understand, this is something that can be accessed even if your phone is locked. So you could put a lot of detailed medical information in there. You could use this card as a resource, keep in your wallet or keep it with you, have it with a loved one. But the key is to have that medical card with you. Now you have to excuse me again, as I said, my eyes are still a little bit dilated, but one of the things I like about this card is if you look at the very top where it says, I have Parkinson's disease, which could make me move slowly and have difficulty standing or speaking. I am not intoxicated. Please call my family or physician for help. Now, this isn't a get out of jail card free where you can go drink and then drive DUI, but it is a means to, if you're ever in a situation where if somebody is questioning, why are you staggering? Why do you have trouble walking? Things of this nature. You've got some backup information to explain your situation. There's also on the back side, you have some general information about contraindicated medications, not to take in the book. An emergency, things of that nature.
I'm sure if you go online, you could find it too.
So this again, this is in the back of your back of the guide. Just as another reminder, by the way, this entire guide is available, and I'll show you the exact website and linkage later. But all of this is available through the Parkinson Foundation website. You're able to download all of this. You can print whatever individual pages you're going to possibly need.
Hey,
So
David,
yes,
I put the link in the chat for you. So if anybody wants to access the hospital safety guide digitally, it's in the chat, and we'd be happy to share that with Susan too for your iPhones or for just your general. Okay.
okay, great, thank you. So having that information, readily available is going to help not just for hospital stays, but any kind of medical emergencies or other kinds of emergencies that you may be running into. Now, some of these other items we're going to be talking about next is specific to going into the hospital. And there's kind of two documents, and they somewhat go together. We're talking about preparing a go-to bag now. This is, I most of you are probably familiar. You're used to hearing if somebody is pregnant, you're ready to go to the family, go to the hospital. You've got a go-to bag. You've got things ready to go. And so this is the material that we're going to be talking about to have prepared and ready for in case an emergency arises or for a planned stay. The key is to use this foundation guide. You can keep that as your own reference. You can keep it with you. But the first thing, and I'll be going over each of these here in just a little bit, but is a signed doctor's letter and a completed medical form, which is listing your medications. Having those medications available in a labeled pharmacy bottle, having some medical directives, legal documents ready, and if you have your DBS, deep brain stimulation, make sure you have your remote, your materials, and I'm going to emphasize this too, make sure you have the specific manufacturer and model number, who made it, the model you have, and so on. So this is the copy of the doctor's letter. The sample form is on page 29. I'll give you a second if people want to look at it. That one, they've kind of filled out some of it. The actual form, blank form, starts on page 41. And I think you've got a couple of copies of that in there as well. Now, the key for this is it spells out, who your doctor is. It has their contact information. It highlights some of the keys of the things that we're going to be talking about in terms of, you do have Parkinson's. These are the kinds of things that are really critical. A good companion piece to this is going to be this medication form. You can do the medication form from your neurologist or whoever prescribes your Parkinson's medications and attach it to the letter, make it as, a two-page document, so to speak. The key to the medication, and this is really important, and they talk about this and give you some examples in the guide. That's, I believe, is on page 27, is when you list your medication, let's say levodopa, you don't just want to say, I'm on levodopa. You want to put down, if you look on page, if I refer you to 27, you can look at these, but there's like 6 different ways or types of when people would take levodopa. You've got immediate release, controlled release, you've got liquid, extended release, things of this nature. So they're going to need to know the very specific type of medication that you're on, along with the dosage and the times. So I just want to stress that that's one important kind of a notation to make sure that you have. and I'm going to give up some anecdotal information about this in a minute. But you do this with all of your medications. As it relates to the medications, particularly from your neurologist or your Parkinson's provider, you know, kind of keep those together, meaning you want to keep your medications that are prescribed. For instance, I get some prescribed by my neurologist. I have some by my general practitioner. I would kind of list those separately and identify which doctor prescribed which meds. Now, I live in a Del Webb community just north of the Villages, and we had a presentation the other day from Ocala Health. Actually, it was HCA Hospital. They have a number of standing emergency rooms by us. And I asked the gentleman, one of the supervisors, what happens if somebody, you know, what's your protocol? What happens if somebody comes into the hospital with this doctor letter and, you know, this medication form? How does it work in practice? He said that if this information is brought, their protocol, their process policy is that is to be entered into the chart and become part of your treatment plan while you're in the hospital. And then I said, well, how does that work in practice? And he said, unfortunately, not as well as we'd like to have. So what's going to be important is some of these other steps that we talk about here in a little bit, in terms of having to be very proactive and reminding the staff and be active in care, either you or your caregiver, you know, support person, to make sure that you're getting what it is that you need. And I'll go over some of this again in just a little bit. But getting this core information, making sure it's up to date, having it ready, having the medications ready to take with you, and we'll explain how that comes into play in a little bit as well, is going to be very important as you prepare and get ready. The other part is preparing for a care partner. This is an extremely important process, and I don't want to de-emphasize this. This is having somebody ready as part of a plan. And you may want to have two people. It doesn't hurt to have more than one. It could be your spouse, your primary care partner, an adult child, a sibling. Sometimes there's advocates, volunteer advocates in the community, sometimes paid advocates. It really doesn't matter who, you know, the relationship to you. It can be anybody. But it's somebody who understands your unique situations. All of you are going to have unique you know, symptoms and what happens if you miss medications and what may appear. And the goal is we want to minimize those from happening. So somebody who knows you and knows what your needs are, that can help communicate that for you, should you need that. Now it says sign any required documents in advance to ensure that they can speak on your behalf. You'll notice that in the guide, those kinds of documents are not there. And that is because these kinds of forms are very provider specific. Each hospital and doctor's offices are going to have their own set. So you just need to either ask for those. One form that tends to be uniform, but what it looks like and what it says may vary, that I'm sure many of you have seen, is the HIPAA waiver form. Which is, you know, the health information protection, where you identify people that they can talk to and that and they in turn can talk to your provider. Sometimes they'll have two forms. Sometimes some places, I've gone to some doctors here where they just use that. Some places actually use a second companion form. And you're just saying, you know, I want my wife, or I want my wife and my daughter. I want my wife, and you don't even have to designate the relationship to them. You can just say friend, who who is also able to speak on your behalf and to help advocate for you. You know, preparing and communication is going to be very key. And again, and I want to emphasize this part. We're not trying to say hospital staff are incompetent, they're bad, they're not doing what it is that they should be doing. We want this to be framed that that we are part of a team trying to help not only the patient get better, but to help the staff so that they don't have to deal with situations that can easily be avoided. So if you would, you know, it has to be framed, you know, David needs his medication within this time, because if he doesn't, he's going to get confused. He's going to be argumentative with you. You know, you're going to have problems communicating with him. But if you keep this medications going, it's going to be helpful for you. This person's going to be less likely to fall. You know, it's things of this nature where you're saying the importance of following these plans is needed, and it's going to help you in providing the overall care as well. Now, the needs, we use these 5 Parkinson care needs. This was developed again by the Parkinson's Foundation. They identified these 5 areas. I'm going to go to the next one because each of these are going to be highlighted as we go. Each of these have separate pages in the guide. This starts on page 10. So these 5 areas are things that are pretty much universal to anybody with Parkinson's who goes into the hospital that they're going to need to pay attention to. This may not be 100%. You may have some unique situations or unique symptoms that you could certainly add or elaborate into this, you know, and feel free to do that. But these are 5 overall key points. Okay, get to the next slide here. You know, the first one is I need my hospital chart to include my exact medications and reflect my at-home schedule. This is, again, is very important because hospital schedules tend to be different than at-home schedules. And if you have, say you're prescribed medication 4 times a day, well, in a hospital, that's going to be like 6, noon, 6, and midnight. That's their standard protocol. Whereas the regimen that you may have worked out may be, you know, 8, noon, 4, and 8. So the key, you know, as I said, as I understand, most hospitals have the protocol that if you have that doctor letter, you have the prescription bottles with the set schedule on it, that's to be incorporated into your chart. Now, the key is to remind them and to get that to happen. We'll be talking about that here next. That's actually, you know, need 2. Now, one of the things about the medications too, and I referenced this earlier, where it says offer your home PD prescriptions. The one hospital representative that I talked to, and and again, this just may be this particular system. They said if you bring in your medications, what they'll do, and your, you know, your list of prescribed medications, if they have that specific medication, their preferred policy is to have them give you the medications from the you know, from their pharmacy. They said if they do not have that medication on hand, then they are to allow you, if you have the, you know, the medications in a prescription bottle, in, you know, from a pharmacy properly labeled, that those can be used. Anecdotally, in the presentation I gave yesterday, some people were talking, and the one gal said, and she didn't say what the medication is, but she said, we did have some medication from home. The hospital did have it, but she said it was so expensive that she would rather have used the ones that she had instead of having to pay a much higher price from the hospital. She said it took 2 days, but they finally did agree and allowed for the rest of the stay to use the medications that they already had at home. So it's something that you may have to continue to pursue for whatever the reason may be. Need number 2, I need to take my Parkinson's medication within 15 minutes of my usual schedule. Again, this is somewhat particularly as it relates to hospital procedures. They have various guidelines and standards, and their guideline and standards as it relates to, getting medications on time it's a 1-hour window for them on their schedule. Now, that's not going to necessarily work. I shouldn't say not necessarily, more than likely, it's not going to work for a Parkinson's patient who needs their medications in a very tight window, or things are going to start happening. And again, it's going to take probably some reminders. It's going to take some follow-up, either from the patient or from, the care partner who's going to help monitor these situations, so that they understand, the staff at the hospital understand the importance of why the patient needs that medication at those times in that window. And again, the goal is to avoid other complications so that people won't have to deal with those, to avoid a potential avoidable problem. One other thing I want to refer to is back in the guide, there is a pull-out page. It starts on page 43. It's called Parkinson's Care Summary for Health Professionals. You won't be able to see it on here, but it starts on page 43. And what's nice is on that, I don't have a slide that specifically shows it, but on that page, and actually there are 10 copies of this in the guide that you can tear out. And so they list a variety of, that summarizes a variety of the symptoms that could be, that are pertinent to individuals with Parkinson's. It summarizes these 5 steps that we're going over. And this can also be helpful for you because the back also lists, it has 2 columns of safe medications and medications to avoid. So, and they're done so by category, antipsychotics, anesthetic, and GI, gastrointestinal. So, as one example is, for instance, if there is a patient who may be slightly agitated, somewhat agitated, if they do a psych consult and they want somebody to, to calm down, their go-to medication is generally going to be Haldol. Unfortunately, Haldol is largely contraindicated for the vast majority of people on Parkinson's. It actually makes symptoms such as that worse. So they list a number of other, potential alternatives to be considered. And they have the same thing with the variety of other categories. So this is a good resource for the professionals. It's a good resource for you. It's a good resource for the care partner in terms of are you, the medications that they're talking about, how that's going to impact your overall progress. Again, this is a as we're talking about the need to, the harmful medications, review possible interactions. And I would encourage people to make sure that the hospital staff communicates with your neurologist. I mean, that's one of the reasons for having that letter in the beginning. They've got, your doctor's communication, email, phone, and so on. You may even have to call your doctor's office and communicate if they won't, this is, we're going away from the medication issues. We're going now to two other areas. Need 4 is I need to move my body as safely and regularly as possible, ideally 3 times a day. Again, as you all know, the key is to have movement, to continue your movement as much as possible. And to do so as a safe means as possible. For instance, a lot of my symptoms are not motor related or movement related, but I do have one heck of a blood pressure issue, which leads to dizziness, can lead to balance issues, things of this nature. I do have some medication that I can take for that, but I have to take it. It's really not on a set schedule because the blood pressure problem is also variable. It can happen throughout the day. But the key is it's going to happen mostly if I'm laying down and I stand up. So I want to make sure that they know that, and that either I have the medication handy to help mitigate that, or that I have or assistant rails or somebody to help continue to do to move. Now, sometimes you're going to be in a situation where you can't physically get out of bed. But there are exercises, there are some alternative things that you could do. There's some references here on this. There's a reference in the book as well that talks about kind of alternative exercises that you could do just to help keep you loose in bed. Neck movements, arm rolls, ankle rolls, things of this nature, just to kind of, move as much as you possibly can, as safely as you can. But communicate to the staff that if you need assistance, if you need somebody from either occupational therapy or physical therapy to help you with that, don't be afraid to ask that. This is an area that was identified as being very, very critical. I need to be screened for swallowing changes. And this is true even if you're in a situation where before you go into the hospital, you may not have experienced throat issues or swallowing issues. But it is not uncommon when you have major physical problems that it impacts other parts that have, you may start having other problems that you did not have previously. UTIs, urinary tract infections, are notorious for causing significant problems, not only in cognition and memory, but for some reason also increasing the likelihood of dysphagia, swallowing problems. This is one of the leading causes of death for people with Parkinson's. It's not so much the dysphagia as the swallowing, and choking, but what occurs is the aspirations. Things go into the lungs, you then get an infection in the lungs, it turns to pneumonia, and that unfortunately many times can be the cause of the person's demise. So it's to avoid that. Again, it talks about that spiral, avoiding things going down. One of the things to be aware of in this is if you are having problems with swallowing, it is not uncommon, again, for in the hospital, the doctor's standard reaction is to do an NPO order, which means nothing by mouth. Some of the staff interpret that as you then can't take your oral medications. Now, some of the medications that are used for Parkinson's can be crushed and can be mixed with applesauce or with other kinds of things. So even if you get that assessment and you get this, NPO order, you may need someone, or again, your care person, to help make sure that you're still able to take the medications that are prescribed. You just may have to take them in a different way than what's happened previously. So that, and again, there's other things that you can do to minimize the risks, as it says here. Where again, the goal is to decrease the risk of aspiration pneumonia. Sit up and take your meals if possible. Smaller bites, brushing your teeth, tongue, and mouth before and after eating to reduce bacteria, which is to reduce the spread of things. Now, there are a couple of other sections to the guide I want to point out. On page 6, they list a standard hospital care team. They list the various staff positions, nurse, head nurse, charge nurse, things of this nature. That's just some good information for you if you want to have some idea of why are all these people around, what they're doing. Keep in mind, though, that if somebody's in the hospital for 4 days, you may have multiple people working multiple shifts. So unfortunately, you may have to communicate things repeatedly to make sure that the communication and your needs get communicated and are properly followed through. On pages 20 to 23, they list a couple of additional pieces of information that don't necessarily apply to every time for everybody that goes into the hospital. Not everybody that goes into the hospital is going to have surgery. So they do talk about some key things to be aware of if you are going in. If you're going in and it's planned surgery, you could probably do a lot of this ahead of time. But the key is you want to be able to take your Parkinson's medication for as long as you can up to the procedure you're having, and as soon after as you safely and medically can. A lot of times, and I don't have specific examples, you're going to have to check, with again, your medical providers. But usually there's a standard of, well, you stop taking anything by mouth 12 to 24 hours ahead of time, or stop taking medication so much before, and we're going to wait, a period of time after. But you need to emphasize the importance of you staying on your medication for as long as you safely can. And so that might mean, them allowing you to, you can't have food or you can't have water, but okay, we'll give you, enough where you can sip to take your medication before and to start to take it as soon as possible afterwards. The other is the same thing for dealing with other kinds of issues that may come up. They have a little section there as it relates to weight loss and things of that nature. So it's a good resource to utilize and to kind of adapt to your specific need. I understand all of you have a guide already. I think you got a bulk delivery or something like that, or have those. It is available on the Parkinson's Foundation website. I believe she put it in another box as well, a link to it. You can download it. They've got all of the forms in there that you can download. Now, I've not tried this, but as I understand, on the, for instance, the medication form, you could actually fill it out on your computer, type the information in, and then print it out and update it as you wish. So that's a good resource for you, for those of you that are comfortable with that kind of technology. So again, just as a summary, you've got the the 5 Parkinson care needs. You got that checklist in the beginning of the book, with the various steps that you need to kind of prepare and plan. And hopefully, if the situation, you do have to deal with the situation, you're going to be better prepared and avoid some of these kinds of issues that some people are dealing with. I will say I have, this material is somewhat fairly new comparatively, and as a resource. And what I'm trying to find out, and I have not yet heard, I've talked to a number of people, is how this is actually working in practice. So we're hoping that we do know some hospitals may be more open to this kind of information and are better at procedures than others. We don't have enough experience yet, at least I have not heard any, from people who've had to deal with this, and what issues or barriers they may have run into that we haven't maybe addressed yet. We do know that the key is communication. Hospitals are going to have their procedures. They're dealing with a lot of people. They have go-to steps. The key is, not trying to tell them what they're doing is, quote, wrong or bad, but the key is to say, this is the need of this patient. David has this need. If he doesn't get this medication these times, this is going to happen, and it's going to make your job, hospital staff job, even more difficult. So let's try to avoid that as much as possible. We all want a positive outcome. And I think by trying to frame things as a way of, this is, we're just trying to help. We want to make things better, and this is why, and give them very specific, concrete examples. That usually seems to help. I'm not going to wish to say it would work 100% of the time, but it's, you're going to run into, I think we all know of stories where, doctors or staff, they make a decision and they say, this is it. And, they're not open to a lot of discussion, unfortunately, but we do what we can. That concludes the presentation. I don't, I'll keep the microphone on. I have to say, this is the first time I've done a Zoom presentation. It's a little bit different than in person. I much like the in-person because of the interaction I can have with people. But if anybody has any questions or anything I can, other information or other things to talk about, I'd certainly be willing to do that.
Thank you, David. Is anybody, you can unmute yourselves if there's anybody at home that has a question. David, you did such a good job. Well, it is such a, oh, there's, oh wait, we have a question. Tamika? I don't hear you. Tamika, no. Do you want to type it in the chat box? David, she's going to type it in the chat box and.
Okay, that's up on top here, right? I just click on the chat.
Yeah, it'll come up once she puts it in.
Okay.
It should work. Oh, do I have copies of the guide you can pick up? Yes, tomorrow when you come in? Yes. Mm-hmm. Perfect. Okay. All right, I think that may be it for questions then. Oh, what's the question? 1 second, David.
Sure.
Oh, Charles, I'm right here. Come to me and I'll ask David.
Does he have a recommendation of a particular app for timing for keep your medication on schedule? Android for Android phones or something?
Is there an app that you know of
I recommend.
that you recommend that would help with keeping the medications on time?
Actually, I don't, and I'm kind of researching that myself. Right now, I'm going through the Apple ones because mine's an Apple, but I know many people have Android. I would say one thing that would be important is whichever one you get, be sure it has a feature that it can be accessed if your phone's locked. So with the Apple one, if you go through, and I haven't loaded it because I'm double checking to see if there are, alternatives other than theirs. But I know if you go through the Apple app, I think it's called Apple Health ID, Medical ID, something. It's something like that.
Okay.
It does, that one has the feature where it can be accessed while your phone is locked. I guess an icon pops up on your phone for emergencies, and it has not only emergency contacts, but then there's the medical information. But I don't know if all ID apps have that. There's a lot of them out there. That's the only suggestion that I would make at this point.
I mean, my husband, we use just setting our alarm, each time, which, or when we're home, Alexa will announce that it's time to take meds.
Oh,
So,
you're talking about as a reminder to take meds?
Yes.
yes.
Oh, that I'm sorry. No, that one I don't know that. Most people that I know basically just use their alarms on their phones.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah. Or like I said, Alexa, so if you're home, she'll tell you also, but, okay. Anything else, Charles? No, that was it. Okay, well, David, thank you again. We appreciate it.